Continuing to follow the developing story as former President Donald Trump has been indicted for a fourth time, this time in Georgia, where he is facing election interference charges on the state level, including violating the RICO law. Joining us now, Fox 5 Atlanta reporter Marc Teichner with more on what we can expect. Marc, thanks for joining us. First of all, what's it like down there this morning? Are there any protesters? Is there a lot of activity, or is it a quiet Tuesday morning in Atlanta?
Well, it's a relatively quiet morning, at least in front of the courthouse. No protesters, just a whole lot of media, as you can imagine. As far as the amount of energy, we're expecting any protesters to show up more likely when former President Trump were to make his first court appearance, which we don't have an exact time for, but should definitely occur before a week from Friday, because that is the deadline that the district attorney gave him and all of the other 18 defendants to surrender, or she said she'd go out and try to arrest them.
I was curious if you had any insight as to, or any planning, I guess, from the city, from the area, or the county, as far as what might happen in the meantime. Or do you keep the barricades up that are there now, or do you increase security as you get closer to the day? Will you get a heads up, I guess, before the former president arrives?
Well, we'll certainly get a heads up, I'm sure, before the president arrives. The barricades and the road blockage is scheduled to end this Friday. You can imagine, obviously, it would be extended if they figure out exactly when he will make his first court appearance. And, of course, you got these other first court appearances with Rudy Giuliani, Mark Meadows, as far as John Eastman, a number of other folks who are also potentially named as unindicted co-conspirators in the case that you guys have up there, the federal case dealing with the January 6th stuff.
The one question that I think a lot of people wondered was, involving a mugshot, and we heard from the sheriff that could in fact happen. Of course, we've heard from people within, the Trump supporters who say that would be a great fundraising effort as well. So they might welcome that. What's the latest on whether or not there might be a mugshot?
Well, last we heard from the sheriff that former President Trump would be treated like any other defendant. That means that he would be fingerprinted, he would have a mugshot, which traditionally does get released to the public here in the state of Georgia. It also means that he would likely surrender himself at the Fulton County Jail. The Fulton County Jail is, quite frankly, a terrible place, and right now it's under investigation from the Justice Department because they've had a number of inmates who've actually died at that facility. It's not someplace you want to spend even a couple of hours. The question remains, would the Secret Service get involved? Would they say, hey, look, we're not going to do it at the Fulton County Jail? Would they put pressure on the sheriff to not release the mugshots? That's all stuff that we haven't heard, but at least for now, we're being told that he will be treated like anyone else. He will be fingerprinted. He will have a mugshot. And do remember, here in the state of Georgia, the cameras are allowed in the courtroom, which is going to be completely different from any of the other cases that the former president is facing, because that means his hearing will be televised when he does show up here within the next week or so. Huge
difference from what we've seen in Florida, D.C., and in New York so far. Real quick, Marc, and obviously we've seen him processed on multiple occasions without the mugshot, so they could make that exception. If they wouldn't do it at the Fulton County Jail, where might they do it? Any idea where they could potentially do it instead?
Well, they could do it here in the courthouse. They could bring him in through the sally port in the back, which is obviously a secured entrance. I am sure they have the ability to fingerprint someone inside that jail. They have holding cells inside the facility, so they could certainly do it here. They don't usually, but again, we're talking about the former president of the United States. I'm sure if the Secret Service insisted, it is possible they could figure out another way around it. Or the sheriff could insist that he wants to make sure that the former president is treated like everyone else and goes through the same process that you or I would if, God forbid, we were accused of a crime.
Yeah, certainly not a usual occurrence in this case. Marc, thanks very much for joining us. Fox 5 Atlanta reporter Marc Teichner with details coming up from Atlanta this morning. Thanks, Marc. Appreciate it. Thanks for the insight.